welcome to the 2023 James C. Meade Friends Lecture. Tonight we will be hearing from Mary Miller, Sterling Professor Emeritus, Yale University and Director of the Getty Research Institute. She will be speaking on the topic, Life and Death on the Island of Jaina, Maya Figurines 800 to 1964. But before I more properly introduce Dr. Miller, let me begin by recognizing all of the members of the Meade family that are present this evening. Virginia W. Meade, her daughters Virginia and Caroline and their families. It was James Meade's vision and hard work in programming this lecture series that made it what it is today, and I am very confident that Mr. Meade would have been eager to attend tonight's extraordinary lecture and, of course, ask a very probing question of our speaker. So let's all give the Meade family a very big round of applause. Let's also recognize tonight's Friends dinner sponsor, Heritage Trust Company, and their CEO, Aaron Jack, and President Michael Romero, who are both in attendance. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. We greatly appreciate it. Now on to our lecturer. A specialist on the art of the ancient Americas, Mary Miller has been recognized for both her scholarly contributions and her curatorial expertise. She curated the courtly art of the ancient Maya at the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., and the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, and co-curated a landmark and award-winning exhibition, The Blood of Kings, with Linda Skeely at the Kimball Art Museum. For both exhibitions, she co-wrote the catalogs of the same title, the former with Simon Martin and the latter with Skeely. Among her books are The Murals of Bonampak, The Art of Mesoamerica, which is now in its 6th edition, Maya Art and Architecture with Megan O'Neill, The Gods and Symbols of Ancient Mexico and the Maya with Carl Taube, and a Pre-Columbian World, co-edited with James Quilter. With Barbara Mundy, Miller edited Painting, a Map of Mexico City, a study of the rare indigenous map in the Beinecke Library. And with Claudia Brittenham, she wrote The Spectacle of the Late Maya Court, Reflections on the Murals of Bonampak. Miller served as the Dean of Yale College from 2008 to 2014 and was the first woman to hold this position. She earned her AB from Princeton and her PhD from Yale. At Yale, she also served as chair of the Department of Art History, chair of the Council of Latin American Studies, and director of Graduate Studies in Archaeological Studies. From 2016 to 2018, she was senior director of the Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage of Yale's West Campus. For her work on ancient Mexico and the Maya, Dr. Miller has won national recognition, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, and she has delivered numerous named lectureships, including the Tatiana Proska-Rykov Lecture at Harvard University in 2021. She was elected to the American Academy of American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1994, and she delivered the 59th A.W. Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery of Art in 2010, and the Slade Lectures at Cambridge University in 2015. Please join me in giving Dr. Miller a very warm welcome.
Well, I can't thank you enough for inviting me here today, Michael and Brian. It's been a wonderful 2 days in Oklahoma. I spent all day yesterday at the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, examining objects in their amazing study center. And then today, where have I been? Well, I've been to the First Americans Center. I've been to Oklahoma City Contemporary, and I've been to the collections here, and I'm not museumed out yet. So thank you for inviting me. I've seen wonderful things, and I'm grateful to all of you. I want to spend some time thinking about this whole interesting category of very beautiful objects that were all made around the year 800 on a little island off the coast of Yucatan. How many people in this room have been to Yucatan? Oh, a lot of you. Great. Okay, well, I hope that this will stimulate those memories of Yucatan. So before we get into the talk, I want you to spend just a little bit of time in which I show you some pictures and I don't talk. I want you to look really hard. So why did I want to show you these pictures? It's because I wanted you to see my hands holding these objects, bringing these objects close to my eyes, and the kind of scale that they have, and why they have been absolutely enchanting to almost everyone who's ever had the opportunity to study them. And one of the world's largest collections is at the National Museum in Mexico City. I'm going to stop running polls, but I bet some of you have been there as well. And in the Sala Maya of the National Museum, there is this long-standing, incredible display they've had of a pyramid of these Jaina figurines. And, you know, there are a whole lot of them here. There are more in other displays, but it gives you the sense of their scale. They're not all the same size. Smaller, bigger, but within a certain range, rarely something bigger than about 11 inches. And a lot of them are whistles and musical instruments and rattles. And they had a big campaign back in 1963 in Mexico to excavate a large number of these figurines for this museum collection. They are some of the most outstanding of the figurines that we see. We're not going to spend a lot of time with them because we're going to find out why and how there are so many other Jaina figurines in circulation in our world. Now, I have been interested in these figurines since, I hate to tell you, more than 45 years ago. And this, I know I'm outing myself, but I've gotten particularly interested now since I've gone to the Getty in thinking about what is the provenance, what is the history of ownership of objects. And I began to think, oh, these Jaina figurines are a perfect kind of study because, in fact, I find them, say, in a publication from 1971, and then I'm in a museum and I think, oh my gosh, I know that girl. I've seen her before. She's got a green face. Like, who could forget that? And so I've been tracking where they are. And as I've been thinking about this talk tonight, I've been thinking about it with a few kind of, almost as if we were looking at chapters. So now we're going to kind of blow through a lot of pictures for you to get a sense of how many of these figurines there are in the world. Everywhere I go. Here is a storeroom in New Orleans. That's one right lying on her back right in front of us. Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Mass. One of those figurines might not be authentic in the black and white picture. I found that in an old record. Brussels has a spectacular collection of them. I saw them last summer, the day before I tested positive with COVID. You can't tell from the picture. Zurich, they've got a whole slew of them. Detroit. The one on the right is a really spectacular whistle. Houston Museum of Fine Arts, Houston Museum of Science. And last year, about a year ago, I was in the Houston Museum of Science. They're doing a reinstall, and I got to see them out of the case and out of the box. Again, those are my hands holding the object close to me so that I can begin to see the details of these faces and these figures that almost seem to breathe and speak. Why are they of such interest for museum collections? Art Institute of Chicago, great collection of them. And I'm able to discover so many more of them now that I can look at collections online across the world. And you can too, if you are interested in any particular kind of pre-Hispanic art, any kind of art at all, any artist. It is astonishing what one discovers. And this is the Yale University Art Gallery collection, which includes a terrific assortment of these figurines as well. Princeton, amazing collection of them. And yesterday, as I said, I was at the Gilcrease. And lo and behold, that photograph yesterday is the one I took with my phone, and I've put her here, along with some images, some screenshots from their online collection. These are, and you begin to get the sense, oh, I've seen them. And this is my Pinterest page. You can follow me if you want. I collect them all on Pinterest. I collect them real, fake, indifferent, old pictures, new pictures. It's fun to create a Pinterest page. And I've learned a lot by doing so. There are 400 in this one called Maya Figurines. So there are some other figurines of the Maya region, and they've been known for a long time. This is a fairly substantial site down in southern Belize, where all the figurines, almost all the figurines, look like they are of boxers and fighters of some kind. When I say boxers, I mean this kind of boxing. I don't mean people who put unwrapped packages on the internet. And when they find them across, this is, someone was telling me about being on the beach in the Caribbean. Some of you might have actually even been to Xel-Há. They found figurines there. They found them in Guatemala. They find them out in the Keys of Belize as well. But everyone is always saying, well, the system, the figurines that we should match them against because of their number are really the ones from the island of Jaina. So what do we know about this Jaina Island? I'm going to be the first to tell you that I've never been there. And you can see it's mainly flooded, and it seems to be almost entirely man-made. This is one of those strange things about it. Every archaeologist who works there say there is no natural soil there. It is all made of what we know the Maya used as fill elsewhere. But it's not, and it's separated from the mainland by a mangrove swamp. And if you want to keep people on an island and not make it easy for them to get to the mainland or vice versa, you might think about developing a mangrove swamp. I know that Oklahoma has no coastline, but mangrove swamp and the Gulf of Mexico is a big deal. They've reconstructed one big pyramid on the island, and that archaeologist has written a book that gives the idea that maybe this was an important port. All right, I just want you to get a sense that there has been some new archaeology there, and we learn a lot from his study, including the fact that almost all the figurines were made in about 100 years, from around 750 until 850. And interestingly enough, I bet some of you have been to places like Chichen Itza, and it's not that far away. There's not a single scrap of such a figurine at Chichen Itza or any of the other big Maya cities in the region. They are essentially only found on the island and around the Gulf Coast, kind of skirting over toward Veracruz. So it took a while, but not very long, for the island of Jaina to be discovered, for people to discover that there was something worth exploiting that could be found on it. And that discovery is certainly made by 1840. And if you look at my blue arrow on the left, you see it looks like Jaina, Jaina, is actually on the mainland in this 1840 map. Okay, and that's the very famous explorer, John Lloyd Stevens, on the right-hand screen. He never mentions it, so we don't know exactly what he knew about it, but we'll come back to him in a minute. There was, however, in the town of Campeche, which is just to the south, there were two brother priests, priest Father Camacho A and Father Camacho B. The fathers Camacho really are known for one thing, and that is for selling pre-Columbian art around the city of Campeche. Now, they wanted to create a museum, and my colleagues, Adam Sellen and Lyneth Lowe, have done fantastic work in really uncovering this early history of the Camachos. But the Camachos had an amazing buyer who, it's just impossible for me to imagine. How did you acquire 1,000 objects, mainly Jaina figurines? This was a man named Florencio Jimeno. He was a cotton dealer, and it was pretty good to be in the business of being a cotton dealer in Campeche from about 1840 until about the 1870s. You remember there's that American Civil War takes place in that period. So he was in a good place to actually be able to acquire a lot of objects. And he built this enormous collection, and he sold it around 1878 to, of course, what he viewed as the great center of culture of the world at the time, which was Berlin. And the Berlin collection, he sold them 1,000 objects. And the Camachos continued to try to open their museum. They were thwarted. There are many reasons for that, but some of it is the sheer isolation of Yucatan and Campeche, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. This collection in the Berlin archaeological collections is, in fact, the closest thing to an archaeological collection other than the ones that the archaeologists in Mexico worked on in the 20th century and early in the 21st century. And you can see that here because we've got figurines that have no reconstruction on them. They still are broken and battered, and they're really instructive about them. And this is Sellen and Lowe talked about the kinds of types that were found in the Jimeno collection. It is, in fact, an incredible collection that includes what turns out to be every single type of Jaina figurine that the world would essentially ever know. That is, these figurines fall into types. You saw that kind of lecherous couple earlier from Detroit. Well, they've got one of those. You see these small figurines of anisophalic dwarves. They've got a lot of those. You see women, men, warriors, captives. They've got every single kind. There's a man in a feathered suit. We see that as a regular standard feature, but there are not a lot of them. But there it is. There's also one of those. Now, Campeche is just a little bit below my marker for Jaina Island, and it was an important port town. It was the last fort that was built by the Spanish. So it's where the last forts were built. There's, I think, 7 or 8 forts there at the city of Campeche. It's an entirely fortified city. Now it's a world monument site, and it's gorgeous to visit it, but don't visit it in May. It is too hot. And John Lloyd Stephens, we know of as kind of our most famous American traveler across Central America and Mexico, starting in 1839 and continuing on through 1841. He publishes amazing travelogues, and he amasses a substantial collection, and he puts it all on view in Lower Manhattan in the middle of the 1840s in a place called the Panorama, and it burns down. So we don't have, and also all his notes of what he had also burned down. So we have no clue about the Stephens collection, even though, and there may have been some other things that were in the old Smithsonian, and that burned down too. So we don't know if he had Jaina figurines, but he didn't go to Campeche. He doesn't mention the Camachos, the father's Camacho, and he mentions that he's buying things, some interesting objects nearby town. So I suspect he is going to be one of our earliest people to have acquired such objects. By the end of the 19th century, one of the most famous archaeologists, a German named Eduard Zähler, knows all about it. And in this text that I've given you a kind of bad picture of, he's referring it as routine. Oh yeah, these are rather like the figurines from Jaina. Well, perhaps he's been to the Berlin Museum. There really hasn't been anything published about it, but he seems to know about it, and he collects this, gets this photograph taken of a big collection of them in Meade, now the capital of Yucatan, at the end of the 19th century. So people know about them, but in a funny way, the places that they are known least about are, in the beginning, in Mexico itself and in the United States. So how did the first pre-Hispanic objects come to the United States? Clue. And it's because there was a traveler around the same time as John Lloyd Stevens who traveled and made I guess I would say minor collections, and he donated them all to the New York Historical Society. His name is Benjamin Moore Norman. I know I always want to stop after Moore and say paint, but it's Benjamin Moore Norman, a man from New Orleans, and he donates these collections. And I had an amazing discovery. I told you I'm always looking for where do those objects turn up. I found them, and especially you can see the one on the arrows point to. That's in the Brooklyn Museum. And it turns out that the curator of the Brooklyn Museum in 1937 knew he had been looking around for things. Perhaps he had looked through every page of the notes of the New York Historical Society. So he knew that these objects were there, and he was busy buying up all kinds of interesting things. By 1937, commerce is in full swing. He goes over, he negotiates a deal, and he brings these objects into the Brooklyn Museum, where they remain today. But it means these are the first objects of Maya art in the US, and you can go see them today in Brooklyn or on their website. Well, there's more commerce by the time we get to the 20th century, and commerce and archaeology go hand in hand. Now, the name of this island, it's on those maps from the early 19th century. Here's what's interesting. It vanishes from maps in the early 20th century. So there are a lot of historical reasons, including the fact that there's a Mexican Revolution, that there is a long dictatorship in Mexico known as the Porfiriato, when these things may not have gotten much, there may not have been much knowledge about them. This big collection of 1,000 objects is sitting in Berlin. It seems to have been on display, but no one was really saying, oh, this is something special. But here are some of the objects in that Berlin collection. And in Berlin, they're saying, it's Jaina. It's Jaina. It's this island. And they know they've got Mr. Jimenos' notes about it, his cards, and they, in fact, are calling it Jaina. But not much of anybody else is. There's one of those loving couples. She doesn't look too happy, I have to say. So then things really do begin to change in the 20th century. And there's a wonderful and important art dealer named Brummer, Joseph Brummer, Ernst Brummer and Joseph Brummer. Joseph is part of this art dealing family. They've had shops in Paris. They open up their store in New York after the First World War, and they decide to make their New York store really a place where you can see non-European art. And this, of course, is a hot topic in Europe, and they're selling things very successfully, but mainly things are coming out of old collections. There's this wonderful book written about what is pre-Columbian art in 1928 by Basler and Brummer. And they've gone into the Paris collections, and they've found some of these figurines too, but they never mention the source is Jaina. They just say, yeah, they're from Yucatan, and they're as interesting as the ones that I had in my hand at the beginning of this talk. By the time we get to the middle of the century in Mexico, there's this very famous and beloved art historian who dies very young named Salvador Toscano. And he doesn't hesitate to call these figurines Jaina. But he has some funny things to say about his own institution. So here he says, the Museo Nacional has fine examples, unfortunately in a dreadful state of preservation. Not a popular politic thing to say. And he goes on to comment on how beautiful the faces are, but often in distinction to the coarseness of the bodies. There's a Spanish scholar who is a major scholar of art history at Pomona College, out in my part of the woods these days in Los Angeles. And he writes a book called, he writes a whole history of art of every part of the world. The guy was a polymath. He's found some of these great figurines too. And he doesn't use the word Jaina. He's not really sure where they're from. So finally, this all begins to get straightened out when there are two archaeologists from the National Institute of Anthropology in Mexico who go and excavate on the island, and they publish their studies in 46. This kind of challenging drawing, and then some photographs. And everyone's thinking, oh, well, the beautiful ones, the fine ones, they must be early. The kind of mold-made ones, they must be late. All of that will turn out not to be true by the time we get into the 21st century. But they're trying to figure out some way to understand them and to also, no one's trying to make much meaning out of the types. But I should add that very early on, there's an important Mexican scholar who says, here's one of the really amazing things. A high percentage, perhaps as much as 50%, represent women. Well, that's a novel idea. And it's not what people are saying about most pre-Columbian art, I can assure you. And it turns out he's not quite right. I'll tell you why. I'm pretty sure the number is more like 33%. But that's a pretty darn good representation. Now, there's just I promised some scoundrels to those of you I was talking with over the drinks. So I just have to tell you about Isamu Noguchi, who is one of the great sculptors of the 20th century. He had a Guggenheim that took him to Mexico City. He spent a chunk of the 30s there making important murals of this sort. This is his famous anti-fascist mural in this market in Mexico City. His half-sister, who's also, like Noguchi himself, is also half Japanese, somehow, this is one of those mysteries I really can't wait to solve, somehow falls in and becomes one of the principal dealers for fake Jaina figurines. Jaina figurines, they're digging them up on the island now officially. Oh, everyone wants one. They're so exciting. There's a possibility of some commerce. And may I sell you some fake ones? So just as things begin to get interesting, they get even more interesting. And you get a sense from this kind of touristic map of 1940 how much people were beginning to enjoy traveling to Yucatan and learning about the Maya. But I want to tell you something else. There's no highway between Yucatan and the rest of Mexico. It's easier for someone in Merida to go to if they want to go for high-end shopping or they want to go to the opera, to go to Havana, Cuba, than it is to go to Mexico City. So there's a train by this time. The train opens in the 1930s that connects across the great kind of swampy areas of the region of Tabasco. But there won't be a highway for some years. And as a result, Yucatan continues to be pretty isolated. And people go there by boat, and they go there by plane in order to enjoy and learn about the Maya. This is where kind of the story and I begin to have a new relationship. Because when I went to the Getty, it was in part there are many reasons I went to the Getty, but one of the wonderful things I discovered was that the complete gallery records of the man you see at the far right, Earl Stendall, had been acquired by the Getty in 2017. And he's really the person there. He also has some records at the Archives of American Art, but almost every bit of his pre-Columbian business is in his stock books, his records, his correspondence. All of it is in our files. And I promise scoundrels, here's another one. He and his partner, Guillermo Ichanis, with whom he's pictured here, begin to really figure out how not just to sell a few pre-Columbian things that are coming up out of old collections, but how to collect them directly in Mexico City and where they think they can do so to begin to excavate materials themselves and surreptitiously spirit them out of the country and sell them in his gallery in Hollywood, California. One of the people who is a very good client of his is Robert Woods Bliss, who becomes he's been an ambassador to Argentina. He is one of the most important collectors in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. He dies in 63, I think. He amasses a really important pre-Columbian collection. You can go see it today in Washington, D.C., along with the fantastic gardens. Bliss does something really smart. He hires a very, very good art advisor. And not only does my friend Mr. Stendall have stuff that has been spirited out of the country illegally, he also has pretty extraordinary collection of fakes, including what I think are probably the same style that Noguchi's half-sister was selling. You know, this is one of those sad things. If you're so embarrassed if you discover you have a fake, your inclination might be as a museum to destroy it or to deaccession it or to get rid of it. And golly, we need to know what all of those look like in order to understand them in the present. In any case, Stendall offers to Ambassador Bliss and his art advisor, they say they've got the most extraordinary collection of figurines, Jaina figurines. They came out of a deep well. They've got gold pieces that go along with it. It was an extraordinary discovery. And Sam Lothrop must have been reading this letter from Stendall, or maybe they'd spoken on the phone, although a trunk line call was pretty much, out of the question in those years, especially during the war. This is right after. And Lothrop and Bliss write back and say, there are no cenotes, there are no such wells in the state of Campeche. And very interesting to have such good advice. But Bliss nevertheless made some mistakes. Everyone seems to have been buying these figurines. And here's one that was in their published catalog in 1957. I'm pretty sure they still have it. And you may say, oh, Mary, why do you know it's fake? We can come back to that later. So one of the things that Stendall did was that he had this terrific workshop. In Los Angeles, houses don't have a lot of basements, but he was on quite a sloping hill. So he had this kind of huge workshop basement space. And as he was acquiring materials, and I just want you to get a sense of the scale and scope of this, he's got objects that he's got a broken piece here. This one needs an arm. Got any spare parts over there? You get a sense of the possibility for creating what with apologies to Mary Shelley, I've been calling Franken-object. Do those parts really belong together? It's always a question when you're looking at some things from Stendall. But Stendall was really smart about a lot of things, and he was because he was down in Mexico, he was making a point to learn. He was asking people questions all the time. And he was often then the one who was answering questions for American archaeologists. And the curator at the Museum of Natural History in New York did not know. 1947, PhD, Columbia University, curator at Museum of Natural History, I think the letter is 47, kind of baffled of what are these figurines you're talking about? And Earl Stendall says to him, these are the most important lifelike figural representations from the ancient Maya. And lo and behold, it's at that point that the American Museum of Natural History begins to make its own very outstanding collection of these figurines. So the word Jaina, we've got the excavations that are published in 46. We've got Mr. Stendall schooling up the archaeologists. By the time we get into the 50s, everyone's calling these figurines Jaina. It's now a brand name. And this is my own teacher here in a picture from the picture is actually 1951, but a book he published in 1954. He's pointing out that this collection in Philadelphia has Jaina figurines. And Nelson Rockefeller was also amassing a huge collection, an important collection of pre-Columbian art. I bet some people did not know that Nelson did that, sitting in this room today. He established the Museum of Primitive Art in 1957, and he bought at least 3, if not more, really extraordinary Jaina figurines, all from Earl Stendall. And I particularly love the blue one on the right, and I just have to say, it is again that ability to look closely, hold it in the hand, because if you look at what's on the chest of this guy in this kind of blue puffy suit, you might not see at first that it's a rabbit. It's a rabbit around something like a mirror. And, you know, I love the idea that it's not the mirror of Snow White, but rather some kind of wonderful, wonderful lunar rabbit mirror that you see when you look at the chest of this undoubtedly some kind of shamanic figure. So people were really baffled, though, selling fakes. That arrow, something awful. I found this in a file. Fakes and real. How do what was the market really like in these years? And the market changed dramatically in the hands of Earl Stendall in that year, in the year of 1957 and going forward. Now, Stendall had very interesting stationery over the years, but one of the kinds of stationery he had said Stendall Pictures. Now, he did sell paintings. He sold paintings of the American West. He sold pre-Columbian art, but he also, at one point, decided to pass himself off as a film director. Stendall Pictures. Whoa. So he arranged, and if you follow my little blue arrows here, Stendall disembarked on Jaina. He got permission to make a movie on the island of Jaina. And for more than a month, says the book, this was written by his grandson's wife, so she had access to family stories. For more than a month, cameras rolled. Out came object after object, with Stendall stifling his excitement. So then we find that suddenly there is, in the hands of one American dealer, an extraordinary number of Jaina figurines, probably selling them to other dealers as well. I love this image of Stendall seemingly playing chess with Jaina figurines. And this is a picture from the files at the Getty Research Institute of some of these figures. I don't think the one in the upper right-hand corner is quite the one I saw yesterday at the Gill Crease, but it's very similar. And the woman in the middle at the top, I know where she is. As I say, I'm tracking my friends. I'm finding them everywhere I go. So Earl Stendall dies in 67, but his legacy of having, here he is once again in his workshop in this photograph from the Saturday Evening Post, his legacy in both sales, volume, and reconstruction is really quite something. And so I know that most of the figurines that are in the Yale University Art Gallery came from Stendall. And I've been very interested in what it means to have this particular kind of provenance. And some figures at the Gilcrease probably also come via Stendall. That's also been very interesting to see. Well, with all this, if I know how they got into American museums and American collections, nevertheless, what's the meaning of Jaina figurines? They were found exclusively in burials, generally not chambered tombs, but in burials. Burials that, because of the nature, you saw all that water on top of the island, thousands and thousands of burials, but with very poor bone preservation. And there's a very fine physical anthropologist who's been working on the Jaina burials and trying to get a better sense of was there more than, it's an island, it's a trading post, perhaps. Were there more than one particular ethnicity that lived there? I know that she's beginning to think that that's the case, and maybe that's the reason why we have so many styles of figurines being made all at once, that they're coming from slightly different places, like the people who come from slightly different places. Despite all that, nevertheless, here we are back at our pyramid. What else can we learn about these, particularly when you work with museum collections, as I do? How can we make more meaning out of these museum collections? I'm not very interested in saying, oh, bad museum, you shouldn't own those. I want to say, let's look at them really closely. What can we learn about how the Maya made materials? What can we learn about why they represented such a strictly limited number of images? So I've gotten very interested in the question of molds. So I found that there are a number of figurines, and I've used this one because it's so entertaining to look at this mismatched couple. He's always old and toothless and has a completely saggy, sad body, and she's always kind of young and beautiful. You can see what changes with these figurines is basically his hat. Like, look at his hat on the upper left. He's wearing a hat that makes him almost as tall as her. The one at LACMA is the one down here, second from the right, at the very bottom. He's got a funny little kind of almost like a French beret he's wearing. So I found 9 examples that seem to be made from the same mold. And that tells me that there's cottage industry, and they're not identical. You can see one's got a mismatched head that seems to have taken place in antiquity. That they also, some of them do get repaired, and many of them, including this whole set, are whistles. And you turn them upside down and you play them in a way that might seem rude if these were real human beings. Let me just say the aperture for the whistle is at the back on the bottom. So something else I've gotten interested in is the idea of what are so many of the figurines. And, you know, remember how small they are. They're this big. They have these incredible facial markings. What are we looking at? And those too are quite limited. There are only a handful on monumental Maya sculpture. Only a handful of times we see the particular kind of facial markings that we see here. But here's one, and this is a monument that's in the British Museum that, in fact, Michael kindly referred to this exhibition I did at the Kimball in 1986. And in that exhibition, we had this monument there, and Linda Sheely and I spent a lot of time looking at these markings. And that the woman, she's running a rope of thorns through her tongue, in case you're wondering what she's doing. Just, that'll keep you awake for a second, just think about that. But she's got the same kind of markings. Look at them right at the top over the lip and coming out. I think this may show that she's making, yeah, okay, so she's running a rope of thorns through her mouth. She might not be making beautiful sound, but I think many of these figurines are showing women who can sing, chant, perform, that they're making these flowery signs, and that is the word for song in many metaphors in indigenous languages of Mesoamerica, is the idea that it is flowery speech is song. And I think it's something like that. So then I'm always looking for the figures that have never been published before at all. And the one on the right is at the University of Kansas. I saw that in an ice storm a few years ago. Nobody ever even looked at it. It was in an anthropology museum. And the one on the left is one I saw in Berlin. She's also not published, and you can see a tiny thumbnail of her in black and white. And I began to notice that in so many of these beautiful women, seemingly beautiful women, have ropes around their neck. I've been looking at these figures for so long, and how had I not seen that there is a rope around their neck? It's not a necklace. That bead, by the way, on her chest was never connected to that rope. Is it possible that one of the things that's going on with these figurines is they are somehow memorializing the traffic in young women, beautiful women, in some kind of acts of enslavement? And just to drive home the point, this is a late 16th century drawing made by an indigenous person for Father Diego Duran of the slave market in the city of Tenochtitlan. And many of the women who are for sale here, the woman they're pointing to, has cotton and weaving tools so that she has a skill. And it is extraordinary when I look across all of these figurines, I find many of them have weaving picks or unspun cotton in the hand. There's something going on as well, and I was thinking about this yesterday at the Gill Crease. This is one of the standard types. This is one of the most common standard types of Maya women. The head is made in a mold. The body is made fully by hand. She's always wearing a necklace. This is a woman who doesn't do very much most of the time. She's sitting here stoically. If she's a whistle, the whistle is in her shoulder. It's much more polite than the other whistles. The whistles in the women with the ropes around their necks is not a polite whistle. But these women almost always, not absolutely every one of them, almost always have a kind of sharp line that runs from the edge of the lip right here, right up into the ear. What is that? And at some point a few years ago, it dawned on me that perhaps it is the horror of the Chelsea smile. You know it from the Joker. You know it from as the Glasgow smile. You know that when someone attacks another person and cuts the lip here, they open up their mouth and scream, and it rips it all the way to the ear. Speaking will never be easy again. Is this a way to also have silenced this category of women? Things I hate to think about. But one of the ways I am making it possible to think about this more and more is that, okay, don't judge me, but I have finally been learning how to use FileMaker Pro. It is a really, really powerful tool. And I have a graduate student who has helped me, who has taken my 960 60, let's say 60 or 50 figurines that I had all on Excel spreadsheets and put them into FileMaker Pro so that I can finally see the relational features. Oh, woman, rope around the neck. Is the dress blue? 95% cases, yes, check. Old man, young woman, what's her hairstyle? Oh, almost always consistent. So I'm beginning to find that, in fact, I'm trying to recapture whatever the limitations are of making these figurines. And by using the power of a database to make sense and give meaning back to collections that can be in, whether they're in Zurich or Leiden or Brussels or the Yale University Art Gallery or LACMA's collections in Los Angeles or the Gilcrease, to find ways to imbue objects that at one point were simply curiosities with what I hope can be a greater sense of their meaning and power. So thank you very much. What I'm going to do, since I don't see a mic, is if you state a question, I will do my very best to repeat it. So I'm going to start with, I'll take maybe like 5 or 6 of them. I'm going to take this lady right here in front.
2 questions. 1, what are they made of? And number 2, I see a lot of blue and green. Do you think there were other colors that wore off?
So the question is, A, what are they made of? And that answer is easy. They're made of fired clay. But it's really vexing because we have almost no molds for these. There's one really good mold in Berlin. Like, I can't tell you how my heart sang when I found a mold. And the firing is generally, they don't have kilns, so the firing temperature is relatively low. All the paint colors are post-fire. So there's no glaze, there's no glass in ancient Mexico. So it's all post-fire. And it's so interesting that what the color that survives the best is that tenacious Maya blue. And it's because the Maya invented one of the best blue pigments that the world has ever seen. And they did so by heating indigo with a clay that is found just a couple of places in Yucatan, and a clay called that we know as palygorskite. If you were alive to remember original clay kitty litter, you think this is a non sequitur. It was a kind of bluish gray clay that's quarried in Georgia and Florida. That's a related clay. And that clay is already slightly bluish. And when it's heated in a process with indigo and some other stuff, you get this powerful, tenacious Maya blue. It was being made into the colonial period, and because we find it on colonial objects up in Mexico City. So it's a really important marker of Maya technology. It survives more effectively than the yellow, white, and red, and occasionally black, which is also on some of these figurines. And you tend to have to kind of look like under an arm to find most of the colors. But that blue survives, and that blue dress that she wears, that woman wears, is just the most beautiful blue dress. Sometimes it's gauzy. Sometimes you can see her body right through it. Sometimes it's kind of, sometimes she wears it above the breast. Sometimes she wears it as a skirt. But that blue dress, it's amazing. I'll take a question over here.
Why did the Maya stop producing these figurines at 850?
What a great question. Why did the Maya stop? you may think I planted these questions. Why did the Maya stop making these figurines around the year 850? So we don't have a hard and fast date for it, but we're pretty sure that we've got about a century of manufacture of these in some kind of cottage industry, maybe family groupings or the like. The site itself, Jaina Island, is completely abandoned. And this is at a time, so you've probably heard about the classic Maya collapse. So if you visit sites like Chichen Itza is what happens after the collapse. Like a few people say, we've got the power. We're gonna keep the lights on up here in Chichen Itza. But the rest of you, you can either come and labor for us, but your cities will be abandoned. And one of the things that is happening in this period is a series of, it starts with some long droughts, and then they get the 100-year drought. So most people, I'm not an archaeologist, but if you open up National Geographic or you watch a special on PBS, most people think that at least 3/4 of the Maya population just dies. That is, cannot be sustained because of the drought leads to scarcity. And ahead of the drought, you've got deforestation. If wood is the only thing you can cook with, and if wood is the only thing that you can make a roof with, and when somebody burns you out, you have no choice but to be essentially enslaved, so that people lose the ability to have an independent livelihood. And the only way to make maize so I had some hominy today at First Americans, and I love eating hominy because hominy is maize that has been converted to its most protein-rich form, as it is when you eat a tamale or a tortilla. And that's because maize needs to be treated with lime, and not citrus lime, but the other lime. And that lime, the way that it was made in Yucatan, can't speak for everywhere in the world. You can use ash also to create your hominy, but the way it was made in Yucatan was that you burned limestone, and to get the white powder that you added to the maize to release these proteins. Without that, when you had that treated maize, when you had hominy and beans together, you had a complete protein. You could have a really thriving, healthy, basic vegan diet that was at the heart of your nutrition. And as soon as you didn't have the ability, to burn the lime, you needed vast amounts of wood because they had no kilns. So you just begin to feel like the vicious cycle. And once your neighbor decides, well, we want to steal your maize this year. So, that begins to a downward cycle. So Chichen Itza's high point is around the year 1000. So they build that city. That is the great triumph of kind of a powerful, centralized, organized government among the Maya in a way that had not happened before. Before you had all these competing kind of city-states. And that's what happens to Jaina. So and at Chichen Itza, this powerhouse, it's so interesting that they collect certain kinds of antiquities from the past. They say, oh, we love your jewelry. We're going to get that we're going to loot some tombs and get some stuff and have it up here at Chichen. Got plenty of that going on, but we don't find any evidence that there was interest in finding these figurines and treating them as sacred things that they should preserve or put in their tombs. Let's see, I'm going to come over here to the red sweater.
You had a slide of the blue figurine, and you said you'd go back and tell us how you know it's fake.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so why do I know that figurine is fake? Let's see if I can get all the way back. While we're on the way, I want you, here's a good thing to look at. Look at the blue. When you see the blue, notice that beautiful turquoise blue, and it is hard to remove. So this is one of 3 figurines that were published in this catalog in 1957. And so the first thing you notice is those are not the shades, that's not the blue. So you might just say, oh, so did they kind of dress it up for the market? And that's always a possibility. So the blue is wrong, the red is wrong. And now I'm going to tell you something that I think is just so weird. But you know how when you're a child and you're learning to draw and you think, I don't want to draw hands? Okay, this is, I don't want to make hands. And there's the feet are wrong too. It's so, I was looking at these objects yesterday in the gill crease, and the hands, the Maya hands are actually very interesting the way they're made, is that they're made from a whole piece of clay, sometimes with the slight indication of that the thumb is opposable. But it's a single piece. And they're not, they're usually, you know, we can look at some of them, but there are no hands and the feet are wrong. I've never seen that kind of fringe on a loincloth. There's just, it's kind of, nothing quite fits together in all this. Let me find some, I need to find some good ones. So that little figure's hands up there on his, you know, little tummy, those are great hands. All these hands have been broken off. But look, so this is a single piece of clay that is only slightly articulated. All these figures have visible hands. So it just, you start questioning, you start saying, well, you know, is it a pastiche? Are some parts of it real? And I've never examined it. So I only know the published picture, and I know that it's not online. And I'd like to go see it, and I think they still have it. So, yeah, thank you for asking that question. I'll take a question right here.
Does Getty have a collection?
So the question is, does Getty have a collection? I worked so hard on the Yale University Gallery collection. I loved working on the Yale collection. And the Yale collection was an interesting collection to work on because by and large, it was, most of it was acquired in 1958, which made it kind of perfect to be working with the archive I'm working now. Getty has 2 museums, and it has a research institute. I'm the director of the research institute where we have archives. So I was walking around with Brian today, and I said, oh yes, the Getty has the Claes Oldenburg archive. So we have archives. The museum collects European art until 1900, plus photography. And then the villa, which is the classical museum, collects classical antiquities. So that was a very long-winded answer of saying no, because I wanted you to get the big picture of what they do collect. And they've been doing some really interesting loan shows, which I think are great. So before I got there, they did a show that traveled to had 2 venues in the United States called Golden Kingdoms, which was about ancient Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and kind of the tradition of bling, which was really a very beautiful and fun show. We did a show that closed in January of just one object. It was the Maya Codex of Mexico. And this is the oldest book of the Americas. The Maya were incredibly, and are today, incredibly skilled art makers and writers. We have so much colonial literature written by the Maya in European alphabet. But they made, there must have been hundreds of books, at the time of the Spanish invasion. And we read about how they are rounded up and burned in tests of faith to bring out the ancient idolatrous objects. So we did a show. Oh, so in 1965, a Maya codex was found in a dry cave in Mexico. It had a long and checkered history in terms of a lot of people saying it's fake, many people saying it's real. In any case, it was fully, and I was very involved in the story of this codex as well. In 2018, the Mexican government said, we've tested it, and now scientifically, there is not a shadow of a doubt that it is a modern day forgery. And this then, it's been incredibly important for this book to be seen and recognized and understood. And we brought it as a single item exhibition to the Getty and wrote a popular book about the oldest book of the Americas this winter. And we've got another show coming up that will open in 24. Gosh, that's soon. On the slip painting, it's really on the three great narrative slip painting traditions of ceramics. That is to say, like Greek vases with those wonderful narrative scenes. The Getty has a really nice collection of those. But there are two other traditions in the Americas. One, the Maya, and I didn't show you any other Maya art. I didn't show you architecture. I didn't show you ceramic painting. But Maya ceramic painting is narrative. It's religious. It's sober. It's funny. It's irreverent. And it reveals really the lives of their deities in many ways on these vases. So that will have Greek, Maya, and the Moche of Peru, who had an incredibly consistent narrative that we find on their ceramic vessels that includes things like animated vegetables. When good beans turn, was there something about beans earlier? When good beans turn into dangerous warriors, and they still look like beans. Beans, and there's a character who's animated maize. So we will have these three wonderful traditions in an exhibition at the Getty Villa, the classical traditional museum, in 24, to be able to look at, okay, these are people who don't use glaze and who paint with clay slip, which is really hard to do, and they all told the stories of the supernatural world around them. So come to the Getty once that show opens. I'm sure I know its name, and now I can't think of it. But come see us in Los Angeles. That's going to be a wonderful, fun show, and it's going to travel somewhere. Where is it? I think it's going to go to the Carlos at Emory University, and maybe one other place. I can't remember. But it's going to be a fun show.